Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist editor with Rick Broering. Each and every week, we talk about sports topics of local interests. We're coming up on gambling season with football about to begin. Of course, my favorite part of the podcast, you can ask me a question on anything. Go to the Xverse, hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. It does not have to be sports related. In fact, we'd prefer if it was not sports related, but it can be sports related as well. As always, the podcast presented by Blake, the attorney Mason. Lots to get to as we're doing this the day of the Bengals' final preseason game, so not a lot of answers to come out of that. Some guys are on the back end of the roster and rookies battling for roster spots, but no starters expected to play, so not a lot of fireworks expected out of tonight, Rick, but for some guys it does mean something.
Yeah, Skinny, I always pride myself on jumping right into the topics here, getting right into it. We don't do all the little small talk about our vacations or our weather at the beginning like a lot of podcasts like to and delay it for 5 or 6 minutes of just listening to nothingness. But I got to talk about the weather for 1 second here in this city.
Yes.
If you have been outside the last few mornings and it didn't get you absolutely jacked to the tits for football, you don't have a pulse.
Yeah, no, it's been the other day, the final day of training camp practice, the joint practice with the Colts. I got to tell you, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a nicer day. I mean, it was just perfect.
I know it's going back up to 90 something this weekend, but having these 50s mornings have been incredible this week. All right, let's go into some Bengals stuff to start here. You actually made news yesterday when you went on ESPN 1530 and talked about some of the rumors going around Paycor Stadium when it comes to JaMarr Chase's contract talks. Let's start with the audio from your appearance on ESPN 1530 and Cincy 360, the show, and we can then break it down from there.
We don't see him out there for practice next Wednesday, the first day after cuts, because I think they have one practice between tomorrow night and that next Wednesday practice because of the cut down dates and whatnot. And that's not, I don't believe that's even open to us in the media. If he's not out there, then I'll be willing to make that bet that you don't see him by the opener. Because the Brown family, think what you want, they're not going to blink, in my opinion. And the number that I've heard where JaMarr's group is, I mean, we're talking, 4 years, maybe close to 160 mil, and about 120-ish of that guaranteed probably is what they're looking for. They're not getting to that number. They're just not. And it doesn't sound like the agent wants to balk off that number either. So, I mean, where are we with all of this stuff?
All right, so there was the little segment. Your segment was longer than that, but that was kind of the little snippet there that drove the news yesterday. And it's funny how this works now in an aggregate world, right? Like you say something on the radio, you mentioned it one way, and then by the end of the night, I'm reading ESPN is reporting JaMarr Chase is demanding $160 million from the Bengals. And I'm like, hold on. That's not exactly what happened here over the course of the day. So, Skinny, this is kind of your chance to speak at length here about what you were saying there and what happened.
Yeah, and honestly, I probably talked out of school, to be quite frank. I don't have official sourcing on this from either camp. It's just things I've heard. And, maybe things heard for somebody like myself shouldn't be spoken into fruition because it's not official. If it was official, I'd have written it. I would have reported it myself. I wouldn't have given it as an answer on a radio interview. But shame on me for saying that and causing the firestorm. And again, that's what I'm hearing. That doesn't mean it's official. That doesn't mean that's what the number is. If it was, I would officially cite sources say or a source says. And I don't have a source on either side saying that officially.
Yeah, I mean, now, when you look at the numbers, and let's be honest, if you've listened to this podcast and heard things you have said in the past, we know you're not out here being a mouthpiece for an agent. That's not exactly what you do. So this isn't like some agent asking you to do their bidding and drive this number up or anything like that. The types of rumors or the tea leaves that you're reading are coming from legit places and coming from legit people. And these numbers that you're throwing out there don't seem that crazy to begin with. They're kind of right in line with what we were expecting, what JaMarr Chase told us he would be asking for. He said, I'm going to ask for more than Justin Jefferson. He said, I'm going to ask for more guaranteed money than Justin Jefferson got. This is pretty much right in line with what that would be. So let's just go here with it. Let's assume everything is true about these numbers. Where does that leave us in all of this?
I don't see the Brown family balking in this case. I just don't. I mean,
does that mean not bulking right now, or he'll never get a extension from the Bengals?
Right now. I mean, when you have him under control for 2 years, it's a controllable asset for 2 years. You could argue doing it right now would allow you to spread out the money a little bit more, some of the signing bonus money. But I go back to this. When you guarantee money You got to take money out of your bank account, put it into escrow, and I don't see them willing to do it right now today. The other part that I don't see, and again, maybe they do, maybe they do blink. Maybe he's going to force them to blink. Maybe they come off of whatever that number might be. I don't think so, but maybe they do, and maybe the two sides negotiate. But to tie up that kind of guaranteed money, or even close to that guaranteed money, for a guy playing a position that could get hurt just as easy as anything else, when you have him under control for 2 years, again, that's 34 regular season games, and you hope 5 to 6 postseason games, 40 odd games between now and when that extension would kick in. I mean, the risk of injury, it's there. And are you going to really tie up that kind of money now with the risk of injury? I just don't see it.
I've heard some people on the other side of this arguing, well, JaMarr Chase is a special situation. It's different from other receivers. It's different from even other star receivers you might have. And my response to that would be, okay, maybe he is. Maybe he is this freak that is totally worth the money. It's worth guaranteeing 80% of his contract over the long term and all of that. But here's the problem with that, Skinny. Once you do it for him, it doesn't stop there. It's not like the next guy who puts up good numbers is like, oh, you're right, JaMarr Chase was different. I don't want those numbers. I'm okay with you giving me less guaranteed money. You're just going to have to keep doing this.
Yeah, and I think that's the precedent you don't want to set. Now, people can say, well, they did it with Joe Burrow, and that is a different case study. I mean, that's the guy who you are going to guarantee money to, the quarterback. It's always going to be the case. But in this case, I'm sorry that I don't see doing it right now. I just don't. And I'm not sure I see. I've done the whole, if it was up to me, it's not up to me. If it was up to me, I'd really seriously think about tagging him in 3 years from now. I know that's not going to make anybody happy. It's sure not going to make JaMarr happy. But you have that within your right as an NFL owner.
Well, you brought up Burrow's contract, and that's a big part of this, right? I mean, the fact that we're talking about guaranteeing JaMarr Chase and signing him to this giant contract right after you did the Burrow deal is part of this whole conversation. Had you not just done the Burrow deal, or you didn't have the Burrow deal looming down the line potentially, then maybe you think a little bit differently about doing it for one guy in a JaMarr Chase, and you think of him as your individual that no one else can match. You got to pay whatever you have to keep him. The Bengals already have one of those guys in Joe Burrow. How many guys like that can you have if you are the Bengals? And again, that's not to say that JaMarr Chase isn't worth it, that someone else won't give him this money, that the Bengals might not ultimately give him this money. But the conversation from the people who are just like, this is a rare case, you've got to pay JaMarr Chase whatever he wants immediately on his terms, I just don't really understand where that mindset is coming from.
Yeah, and I just think at the wide receiver position, I think there's eventually going to be a market correction where one team just says the amount being asked is not worth the value of that player. And I think we're getting really close to that. The wide receiver market's pretty saturated. There's a lot of good ones that come out every single year. But you could argue maybe not a lot of JaMarr Chases. I'll give you some of that. And listen, I'm not here to tell you I don't extend him for the money they may be seeking, in 2026. But the fact that he's still under team control, well, sorry, man. That's just the way it is. And again, you can play it how you want. If you want to sit out, that's your prerogative. But at the end of the day, I mean, I just don't know. And that's why I go back to, if he's afraid of doing things in camp for fear of injury, how are you willing to then play 17 games risking injury for only $1 million? Tell me how that computes.
Well, I agree with that. And I agree with the part that he hasn't really accomplished anything if he just sits out preseason and then starts playing games, at least in terms of gaining leverage for his negotiations. Now, I do think there's a difference between, if I am a professional athlete, playing preseason games that are meaningless, that I could potentially get hurt in, that I don't care about, and I don't really want to do the practices or games to begin with. They're kind of an annoyance to me, versus going out and doing what I love on Sundays when the lights are on. I do think that is different. And I could see, hey, this is about the contract to some extent, but it's also about, I just don't want to be at training camp. And
I don't believe that. I think he loves football, to be honest with you. And he's been at other training camps and participates. So I know what you're saying, but I don't believe that's the case.
Sure, everyone loves football that does this, and they all say they like, but like, Skinny, no one likes going through training camp. You guys hate being there. I mean, like,
there's no question about that part.
It's silly. If you're a guy who's that good and that talented, you've done it for 5 years or whatever. Now, I mean, you've done it through all of college and did 2-a-days probably back when he first started stuff. I mean, like, you're just tired of the grind and all the nonsensical stuff they have to do leading up to the season. You like football when the season starts is when you like football.
Yeah, but I would say I don't believe he's sitting out because he doesn't like training camp. I think it's clearly it's clearly contract related. It's never been specified that that's the case from any party, but it's pretty much that's the case.
No doubt that it's contract related. I'm just saying, I think there is still room to believe he might come back for the games. And there is a difference between playing in preseason games and training camp versus playing in the regular season. I mean, there is a clear line of demarcation, if you will, to steal one of your terms, between those two things. When I mentioned that, the aggregate, how all these news outlets take a story and then like, it's a game of telephone, right? Someone publishes one thing with it, of like ESPN 1530 is reporting, then turns into ESPN is saying JaMarr Chase and his agent demanded this. And it's like, it's funny how that goes. I also love when everyone turns into a financial expert as soon as these conversations come up, right? I'm like, listen to podcasts and guys are going, annual average value of the contract is less than Justin Jefferson's. And the cap hit is it's like, Joe from Fairfield, no offense, man, but like, you have no idea what you're talking about with the financials of this deal, the intricate details of the cap hit and everything. Like, let's just relax on all of that. You know what I mean? Like, just settle down. It's fine.
And there is no deal as we speak.
Right. Skinny, we've talked about this for weeks on end now. I don't think there's anything new, but is there something else you want to say to put a bow on this?
Yeah, no, the only thing the first part of that conversation where I was asked, if I had an amount of money to bet, on whether or not he would play in the regular season opener, where would you put your money? And I said, well, I'm going to hedge my bet. And that's where the conversation kind of started there. If I don't see him practice next Wednesday after the cut down dates, I fully believe that's where we're trending, unless they're close to a deal at that point. I mean, at that point, it's time to ramp up. And I think you'd even agree, even those that think it's okay to sit out camp and all that. Next Wednesday, it's time to get going.
And I've agreed with you on that point from day one. It's like, that's the day to me that really says if this thing is a real holdout that could cost him game or could cost the Bengals games, or if it's just him avoiding training camp while also trying to negotiate that contract extension. Training camp did wrap up this week. There have been several storylines that have kind of made the rounds. There's been a few that have stuck out to me more than most. So I'm going to go through a couple of the ones that I've been interested in, especially over the last week. And I want you to say, were they overhyped, underhyped, or the media got it right? You just tell me how you think the story's been covered, how much there is to each story. The first was this past week, Joe Burrow was wearing a glove on his throwing hand. There was some talk. Zach Taylor said it was because on bad weather days, he sometimes does that, which quite honestly is just an absurd explanation for this, because one, that was one of the better days that they have had. And two, no, he doesn't. Like, that has not been a thing. That is not something that you guys have reported on in the past. It's not a regular thing for him. I'm not saying he's never done it, but it's not regular. So that became a story. Since then, it seems like it's kind of blown over. But what would you say about Joe Burrow and the glove and just the uncomfortability of that injury right now?
Well, if it's not a thing, why do we keep getting it pushed off that it's not a I mean, it's something. It may be benign. It may be I want to, because of my wrist situation, I just want to keep that area warmer. I'm having a hard time with circulation. Okay, that's all fine. That's all well and good, but listen. Maybe I'm totally blind and I haven't seen the last 2 years, and we don't get a chance during the season to see anything outside the first 30 minutes of practice. And it's usually just guys warming up, and maybe he does it in practice. But I got to tell you, he said he's worn it I've never seen it. Never.
Skinny, last year, the man got off of an airplane or a bus, and in like the 6 seconds of snippet that you could see his hand, people saw a neoprene sleeve and it was immediately online. If he changes his hair, we freak out about it for a week. If he had been wearing a glove to practice in for the last few years regularly, we would have talked about it at some point. So this has not been a regular thing, and it annoys me when they lie about it, because then it makes it seem like it is a thing. Right. You could have told me it was for literally any reason. If you were just like, he likes a little compression on the wrist right now since the surgery, I would have been like, cool.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay. No problem. Yeah. Wear it all you want. But now I'm like, wait, is this a thing? Now, I want to know, did anyone ask Zach Taylor, like, has he been drawing on his iPad? Was there any of that afterwards?
No, we didn't reach that level. It got one question worth and was kind of scoffed at and moved on.
So I would say this story is underhyped. I feel like the glove thing is actually a bigger deal than it was made out to be. Would you agree?
I think it would be, honestly, though, if he hadn't had a pretty good practice, and he did, in my opinion. I mean, the numbers, I charted him. Paul Daner charted him. I think Dan Hort charted him. He was 21 of 26. He did throw into a bad red zone interception, in my opinion, where he kind of just threw one up for grabs with the blitz coming. And you could argue, well, it's just training camp. He probably would have eaten the ball in the regular season. He probably would have. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, the only thing that I think was questioned coming out of that is not pushing the ball down the field at all. And, I even made the point of, listen, one of a couple of the sessions were third down periods. You're trying to get the ball to the sticks in third down. You're not looking to hit home runs. So I'll on that session, I don't expect him to push the ball. You can push it down the field on third down. But again, if it's not what you were trying to accomplish, I get that. And maybe other periods, he looked downfield to take a shot and it was well covered. And you said, nope, that's not where the ball is going to go. Because in a game, I wouldn't go there. Even that's where I want the throw to go. So I think that's the only thing that came out of question. And again, if it had been a wonky practice with that glove, then I do think there would have been a lot more to it.
We'll get back to our overhyped, underhyped, really exhilarating segment that we're doing here in a second. But while we're on the topic of Joe Burrow, what's the final verdict on his training camp, Skinny? Would you say he's essentially himself at this point? Would you say it was a good camp? Do you feel very positive about him coming out of it?
I would say it's a good camp. He made a couple of throws on Thursday, a deep route, kind of a deep out route to T. Higgins that he dropped right on a dime. I mean, it was a great throw against tight coverage, and T made a heck of a catch falling out of bounds on that play. There were some wonky moments, and I think that was probably to be expected. I mean, he didn't throw the ball perfectly every day. The thing, again, that he has not passed the test on, and I get that you don't want this to occur, and it didn't occur, is he still has not taken a hit and had to brace himself. And is that going to be a factor at some point? The fact of, was the glove because his wrist is a little tired from doing all the throwing, and is he capable of throwing 45 times in a game? I know what we saw in a preseason game, and that looked pretty good for a series, right? It looked like Joe Burrow is supposed to look and has looked. So I would say it's looking pretty good, but I still think you're going to, as a fan, probably have to hold your breath big time the first few times he gets hit to see how he reacts when he gets back up and if he landed on the wrist at any point.
All right, let's go back to our storyline here. How about the improvement of the safeties? I've heard a lot about that, especially after the joint practice with the Bears. It seemed like people were really hyping up this secondary ever since that practice where they got a little bit chippy and started chirping a little bit. How much do you think that is real, or do we still need to see that in actual games before we can start talking about how much improved the safety core is?
No, I think it's real. And I think that's really Von Bell coming back and having a guy back there that knows exactly what to do defensively from a call perspective, how to disguise coverages and disguise things. And he's got a good player next to him that he only had the really 1 year in Baltimore, but seems like a guy on the rise. And this time, instead of, Nick Scott coming from another place and he and Dax Hill trying to learn on the fly together, you got Geno Stone now learning from a guy who knows all the ins and outs of the defense and seems to be a really quick study. And to the point of the safeties, I was talking to Geno Stone a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking about his camp performance and whatnot. I said, yeah, you haven't gotten a chance to steal any balls yet. I said, but nothing's gone over your head. He goes, as long as they don't notice me, man, I think I'm doing my job. And I think that's true. I mean, I think, last year we noticed the safeties too much, right? And this year you haven't a whole lot. And hopefully you don't, other than Geno Stone and maybe occasionally swiping a pass that's overthrown or making a good read, whatever. I just think I think it's a big time improvement. And I think it just trickles down from there.
All right. So you would say got it right on that one, probably?
Yeah.
Not underhyped. It's been talked about a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Right.
And then Dax Hill's kind of along those same lines, Dax Hill's strong performance at cornerback. That's been kind of one of the surprising storylines, I would say, of camp, is how well he has played moving to cornerback there. Do you think that's been overhyped, underhyped, or is it right on target?
No, I think it's right on target because he was in a battle for the job, and it looks like he's won that job. The place I would say it's overhyped a little bit is we still haven't seen it in a game that matters. I mean, I still need to see it in a game that matters.
Do you think he's clearly the starter?
I do. I think he earned that. And I don't think that's because DJ Turner took big steps backwards. I just thought Dax earned the job, and he probably, when the camp started, even though DJ Turner's listed as a starter ahead of him on the depth chart, which is technically official, but not all that official. I do think that Dax was in the lead from the start and had to play his way out of that starting spot, and it ended up playing his way into the starting spot.
One of the other storylines that has developed as camp has gone on, it's kind of gotten bigger and bigger as camp has gone on, has been the health of the defensive line. There have been some injuries there. but there are also some main guys that have stayed healthy. But it's been talked about a lot. So do you think it's talked about too much at this point, the injuries to the defensive line, or do you think that's going to play a big role in the start of the season?
Oh, I think it plays a big role in the start of the season. I mean, Cam Sample would have made this team. Miles Murphy is a rotational piece who, again, the initial reports are 2 to 4 weeks. If it's on the 4-week end, he's not going to play in the opener. So that takes him down a peg. So then, you're counting on Joseph Osai to take the step forward that we've all been waiting for him to take, and he's had a good camp, and maybe he does. But after that, at the end position, your next depth piece is probably a rookie in Cedric Johnson, and I thought he had played his way into making this team, especially after Cam Sample got hurt. But yeah, I mean, then on the inside, McKinley Jackson at tackle being hurt and probably not playing in the opener either. Do you need to go find a bigger body to fill his role, or can you get by with a BJ Hill, Chris Jenkins, Sheldon Rankins, Jay Tufele rotation for a short period of time? So yeah, I think it's a legit storyline.
What about, real quick, just off that was my last topic there on the storylines, but what about Chris Jenkins? People got a little bit excited him after the last preseason game. What have you seen from him on a day-to-day basis there at training camp?
Yeah, I think he's been solid. I mean, listen, the Tampa game, he clearly got pushed around at the goal line. I mean, you can watch that rep time and time again. And I talked to Lou Anarumo about his performance after that game, and he said he was solid. And he said, he's got to anchor better down there and learn how to take on some double teams a little bit better. But he's had a solid camp. And I thought that was at least good to hear, because it's always hard to evaluate those guys, right? They don't make a ton of flash plays. You can sometimes see when they get clearly pushed out of a hole or pancaked, and that can be alarming. But I thought he certainly had if you want to call it a bounce back performance against Chicago, and he'd be a guy I'm interested to see play in the Thursday finale.
Yeah, he did have that one sack that was exciting, but had a couple other plays or reps that were pretty impressive too. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of him as well. We haven't really heard a lot about him throughout training camp, so I thought that was a little bit interesting. All right, we'll wrap it up with this, Skinny, in terms of our Bengals segment. They will have to announce their final 53-man roster on Tuesday. So what's going to be the toughest cut in terms of position group? Is it tight end?
Yeah, listen, I saw a website today that said Bengals should be careful cutting Tanner McLachlan because, somebody's going to pick him up. They're just not keeping 5 tight ends. They're just not. I'd be stunned if they did. Maybe they do. Maybe they go in with 9 defensive linemen, 9 offensive linemen, and you shave a spot somewhere there to keep that 5th tight end. But I just don't see that happening.
Is it between Hudson or McLachlan likely that gets
cut?
I
don't think it's between anybody. I think the first 4, there's a clear line of demarcation of Mike Gesicki, Eric All, Tanner Hudson, and Drew Sample, not whatever particular order, and then Tanner McLachlan's after that group, and I think there's a chasm there. And that's not that Tanner McLachlan, I think, played well, performed well when he's been given the chance. It's just sometimes if there's 5 guys, somebody's got to be number 5. I think he's number 5 at the moment. Now, you could argue maybe you look to deal a Tanner Hudson, and if you can get some value back because you are so deep in that tight end room. But gosh, that guy it seems like he makes key plays, more key plays than really you think about. And I think he's a nice guy to have on your roster.
So a tight end, it's more about just, are you going to keep a certain number of guys rather than it's down to like 2 guys and it's tough to decide which one. It's like, who it is. It's more so just even the 5th guy could help you out potentially. Are there any other positions that really jump out to you as like, this is going to be a tough decision?
I mean, the punter, I know it's not sexy, but Brad Robbins suffered that hip flexor. And it looked like Ryan Rekow after his opener was going to get a chance to maybe seize that job. And he really didn't in Chicago. He really didn't in the joint practice against the Colts. Maybe he gets all the punts in the preseason finale and booms them away like he did the first time around. But part of what you're looking for is consistency from that spot. And when push comes to shove, do you take the veteran who or the big-legged kid that you just don't know where the consistency is, but he can also bomb a 65, 70-yarder on occasion? And so I think that's still a tough decision for them to make.
Jackson Carman's going to make this team, isn't he?
I don't know. I lean that way a couple of weeks ago. I'm leaning against it now. He's been running with the 3rd string. I think they're trying to get as many reps for Cody Ford and Jackson Kirkland at tackle. And that's where, it's possible they only keep 9 offensive linemen, a backup center, Kirkland, Ford, and then, maybe another guard of some kind, or they go get somebody off the waiver wire. But yeah, I think Jackson Carman now is on the outside looking in. I think that opening performance really put him behind the 8 ball. And the fact that again, in that joint practice the other day, he didn't come in with the 2s. He came in with the 3s, and I think that's significant.
All right, Skinny, any final thoughts? They will wrap up the preseason tonight as we're recording this on Thursday. And then we will have a week before we get into the start of the regular season. We will do our official Bengals preview show, I guess, next week, where we go through the whole schedule and everything like that. But anything else you want to get to now to wrap up camp?
No, I'll be honest. I've been impressed with most of the rookies. Jermaine Burton's flashed at times and still has some things he needs to do. But obviously, Josh Newton's had a great camp. Dejon Anthony's had a good enough camp to me. I mean, I didn't have him on my initial 53 when camp started. I think they now keep 5 safeties. And he's one of the 5. And has played his way in. He's kind of played his way actually into a big nickel role where he comes in as a third safety in certain defensive packages. So I think the rookies have done pretty darn well.
What about your boy Mamu? Is he going to make the team?
I think he is. I had him on my last 53 going into coming out of the second preseason game rather. And I'll probably have him on. I'm going to do a final one on Monday. I'm leaning towards him being the 5th linebacker. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people have argued they're only going to keep 4. And I just don't say, I think he can help you on special teams too, which is always the key for that 5th guy. And I think he makes it.
Yeah, you mentioned him on last week's show, and then, I'm watching the preseason game on Saturday, and it's hard to miss his name when he's out there. You see the name on the back of his jersey, like, oh, that's the guy Skinny's talking about. I tell you what, watching him, he just smacks dudes. He just hits everybody as hard as he can. It's fun to watch him. Yeah,
he's not big. He only weighs about 230, maybe a shade over that. He's not overly tall. And I asked Louis Anaru if that was a detriment. And he said, no, man, he's just a football player. And, I thought that was a positive sign right there.
All right. So we'll wrap up the Bengals segment for this week. We'll get back to it next week when they have made their cuts and we are ready to start talking about the start of the regular season. But for now, let's move to the Reds, who were hot last time we talked and just a win away from getting back to 500, which is almost like winning the World Series in Cincinnati. But that win never came. Instead, they lost 3 straight after that. They're 2-4 since we last spoke, 62-65 overall. 3rd place in the NL Central, and 12 games behind the first place Brewers. They are 5.5 games out of the last wildcard spot in the National League now. But Skinny, the big news of the week came yesterday when Joey Votto, former Red, officially announced his retirement. It came basically right before the start of the game, and he immediately then went over to the Reds clubhouse and started hanging out with those guys and giving them hugs and all of that. Devin Mesoraco, his only follower on Twitter, was sharing some memories and retweeting people's thoughts throughout the night. So a feel-good moment for Reds fans in the midst of their season swirling around the drain. What were your thoughts there on Joey Votto announcing his retirement?
Yeah, I mean, you would have liked to see him get one more crack at it, right? And he was trying to get one more crack at it. But, I think you and I would have agreed, remember Reds fans at the end of last year were clamoring to bring him back for one more year, even at the hefty price. And it just, you weren't going to catch lightning in a bottle. I was hoping he'd catch maybe a few at bats in a bottle, and he didn't. The numbers in Buffalo weren't very good. And I think at that point he realized I just don't have it anymore. And good for him. The thing I would hate is watch him come up and go like 1 for 15 with 12 strikeouts. And you go, what are you doing? What was the point of that?
Is it almost worse that he played most of the season in the minors and couldn't hit over 200? That feels like a rough way to go out too.
It does, but I don't mind. In that case, for him, good for him for at least giving it one more try and then coming to the realization of, listen, I just can't do this anymore.
That's well within his right, and I certainly understand why, as someone who loves a sport, you would keep trying to play until you've absolutely, positively proven it to yourself, when healthy, that you just can't do it anymore. So I get it. And that's totally his right. I don't fault him for it. At the same time,
the Instagram announcement was odd though, a little bit, right? It was almost so on brand the way he did it.
It was on brand for him, so that didn't bother me. But I will say, yesterday was anticlimactic. As a Reds fan, I was kind of bummed out because, everyone's jumping in and they're doing their whole Joey Votto is the greatest ever. And people, the media outlets around here are tweeting out watch this montage of Joey Votto's greatest moments, or watch this video from when Joey Votto did this great thing. And Lance McAllister's tweeting out some good memories from when he was doing stuff on the radio show with them. And all of that's great. But you know what? I wanted that last September when he played his last home game with the Reds. And we all knew that was the end of it right then. But we were doing this weird song and dance where the Reds are like, well, we're not going to say anything because he still wants to come back and we're not going to let him come back. And I kind of just wish Joey would have figured it out back then that like
Yeah.
it wasn't going to happen for him, and he should have said goodbye. So we could have done this last year at this time. Like now that he's been away and he's been in Buffalo and toiling around in minor leagues, and there've been kind of like jokes made about him at times this year. It's like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel the same. Yesterday, I wasn't in a mood to watch like Joey Votto montages. He's been out of my mind for the entire summer. I just don't really care that much about it right now. And to me, it was kind of a letdown.
Do you think they'll bring him back this year and honor him at a game before a game? I think I think they will, and they should.
If you're the Reds right now, why wouldn't you sign him back and let him play for the rest of the season for you? Because you have nothing else going on. Get the fan base to come back out.
I don't know about that part of it. I'm just saying, just bring him back to honor him.
What the hell would it matter? You have nothing to play for. Your fans could care less. They're all pissed off at you. It'd build a little goodwill with the fan base back up for the last month of the season.
I will say, if it was a choice between him and Mike Ford, I probably would certainly take him.
I could name about, if it was him or Will Benson, I'd take him. What are you talking about?
Fair enough.
I mean, but that being said, like that's kind of annoying too, because they might do something like that. They might bring him back, sign him for a day, honor him, whatever. That's kind of annoying too. Like that whole thing, like Cincinnati, I only played for you. I love you. Well, no, you didn't. You went and you tried to play for Toronto too. You made a whole big deal about that. That's fine. Well within your right. It's okay to do that. But you lost a little bit of the luster of the sign-off you could have had last September when it was already over then and we all knew it.
Yeah, I still think whenever they bring him back, the fan base will respond accordingly. I do.
They will. He's he should be. He was great while he was here. I like Joey Votto. I'm not trying to be against Joey Votto. I'm just disappointed because I do like Joey Votto, and I wanted to celebrate him last year when it was the right time to do so. And instead, we got this sort of weird send-off thing that wasn't fleshed out. And then now we're doing it after the fact, and I just don't really care as much. I did get the question. I got a Ask Anything question that is a little bit ridiculous because is Joey Votto the greatest professional athlete in Cincinnati of all time, given what he's done over the last millennium or something like that? And I was like, well, no chance that's the case.
Of all time?
Yeah, the best pro athlete in Cincinnati of all time.
No, Johnny Bench probably would be.
That was my answer too. I think is Johnny Bench. But here is the more interesting question, because it's Joey Votto is obviously not.
Johnny Bench was I think a scratch golfer, was an outstanding bowler, and you can laugh at all that as sport, but I mean that dude and is arguably the greatest catcher ever. I'm not just talking about him as the greatest Red of all time. To your point, maybe the greatest athlete of all time.
Well, yeah, that makes him like an all-around athlete. But just in terms of like what he accomplished for the city, his cachet in the city, all of those things, I think Johnny Bench is probably the answer to that. But like from the Joey Votto perspective, where does he stack up among best pro athletes in the city if you're trying to rank him on that list? I started just thinking about it a little bit, and I'm like, does he even crack the top 10 or top 15?
I mean, I don't know if he cracked my top 10 Reds of all time. I'm serious about that. I mean,
I agree. He never won anything.
And I'm not crapping on that. I don't mean to, I go wishy-washy on the Hall of Fame point for him. And I do think a very good case can be made for that, but I can also see it being a tough answer for some voters when that's concerned. So, and that's what's so hard is when you say he's not even one of the top 10 Reds of all time, people go back and look at history, right? I mean, we're talking pitchers and position players, all those things. And maybe he does. I mean, I'd have to sit down and write it out, but I'm just going with guys off the top of my head. And people are going to start screaming, well, look at his advanced metrics and the on-base percentage. Okay, whatever. That's all well and good. But I mean, Frank Robinson's a Hall of Famer. Joe Morgan's a Hall of Famer. Johnny Bench is a Hall of Famer. Pete Rose should be a Hall of Famer.
And those guys are clear-cut, undoubted Hall of Famers. It's not, you don't have to
question. And when you're talking athlete, I mean, go through a chunk of Bengals probably on that have to go on that list. Again, I'd have to sit down and write this out.
I mean, Joe Burrow is already ahead of Joey Votto just on the basis of taking the Bengals to a Super Bowl and an AFC Championship game to me. Like he's already done more for this city than Joey Votto ever did.
It's so apples and oranges, though. It really is.
It is, but I think when you look at like what an athlete does for a city, winning in the postseason has to be a huge part of that. And Joey Votto did absolutely zero of it. Now, that's not all his fault.
No,
but that does matter when we're ranking like the biggest athletes in the city.
Yeah, no. And again, I do think he should be remembered certainly fondly as a player because it was a long, lengthy, great career. Bottom line, you can argue he hung around a couple of years too long, and maybe he did, and that drags some of the numbers down. You could argue again from an on-base percentage and things like that. I mean, he's a top 10 hitter of all time in some metrics. So you'd certainly say that should be a top 10 Red, but Again, I mean, I've always said this, if you have to make a case for somebody being in the Hall of Fame, should they?
To me, it's the Hall of Fame should be no doubt like that guy is. But I understand for certain people that he is a no doubt Hall of Famer.
I love
and that's where the argument comes in.
I love Tony Perez, but he is the poster child, in my opinion, of the Hall of Very Good. I mean, there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Very Good.
I think Votto's one of those guys too. My argument always comes down to, like, were you ever the best player during your era in your sport? And Votto, there's an argument to be made that for a year or two he might have been.
Yes,
so
I think for a year or two
gives
he
him
was
a chance.
Yeah,
but I mean, most guys, you have a pretty clear. That guy was like the best in his sport for 2-3 years, and it's you can maybe make that argument for Votto that he was for a year or two, but I don't know. I mean, that's tough to say about him.
My guess would be this, and I'd have to see what the Hall of Fame class in 5 years, who's in that class, right, or who's in that voting block. My guess would be it takes 3 ballots to get him on, in my opinion.
Sounds about right. I don't know if I have much of an opinion to put on that, but that sounds about right. Yeah.
And that gets him in. And that's probably what's right.
Yeah. Definitely not a first ballot guy, but I do think he has a pretty good chance to get in overall, especially because the voters now are so much more in tune with the advanced metrics. And
no question. And yeah. I mean, one of the things that's been pointed out and I can't remember where I saw this is, Miguel Cabrera was a great player for a long time, but kind of hung on, and he's got all those, for lack of a better term, counting stats of hits and home runs. But some of the other advanced stuff just dropped off over time. And Joey's did too, a little bit. I mean, but if you look at it, even on base percentage the last couple of years, it's not awful. Just the batting average stunk and struck out a lot and all those things. But, if you look at some of the things, he still was doing some things at a high level. And, if you can argue that, and some do, that the main thing in baseball is don't make outs. And he got on base 40% of the time. So he made fewer outs than most. Okay, you're right.
He is the poster boy for that statement right there. That is like his claim to the Hall of Fame is that if you subscribe to that thinking that that's what baseball is all about, is not making outs, then Joey Votto is your guy, because that's totally his philosophy on the sport.
Yep.
All right, let's get into some Ask Skitty Anything. We'll start with last week was our local college football preview. Next week, we'll get into the betting segments when the local teams start playing. This week is week 0. There are just 4 games on the slate, none with local interest. But someone did ask us, who do you guys have winning the college football playoff, and who are your picks for the Heisman? You didn't talk about that in your local segment last week.
That's a good one. I mean, it's hard not to go with Georgia or Ohio State, in my opinion.
I agree.
Because I just think they're going to have great seasons, and they're going to wind up getting good seeds. I think that's the other part to it.
Well, and the other part is look at the teams who are right behind them that are supposed to be the teams that are threatening. It's like, do you believe in Oregon?
Right.
No, I don't. Sorry. Like, I just don't. So, I find it really hard not to pick Georgia, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it feels chalky, but it feels right.
Unfortunately, that's where I'm at with this. The Heisman thing I find fascinating because, like, the lowest odds for any Heisman candidate right now is Dylan Gabriel at plus 750 on FanDuel.
I know. And I was literally, that's why I was getting ready to look up and see what the odds were. And I don't know if I make a great case for him. I think it's the case is being made because of the offense he's being plopped into. And he's a good quarterback. He is a good player, but I don't know.
He's been around for 6 years now, and he's never been the best quarterback in the college football.
Yeah, I guess the sneaky one, and it's not sneaky because everybody's known him for a long time. Hell, coming out of high school with the NIL deal he got. But if Texas ascends into being a real player in the college football playoff scene, and I think it does, Quinn Ewers, I think, shoots up the board.
Well, he's number 2 actually on the list right now that I'm looking at. So he is pretty high up there. Carson, I'm sorry, he's number 3. Carson Beck is number 2. But Skinny, the top 20 plus names here are all quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that we have had 3 straight quarterbacks now since we had a receiver. It was Devontae Davis, right? The Alabama.
Yes.
Kid was the
Devontae Smith.
Devontae Smith, the last non-quarterback to win the Heisman. I'm going to go out on a huge limb here because it's nothing but quarterbacks. I don't see a lot of value I like for any of those guys. Emeka Egbuka is 120 to 1 odds. I could make the argument that he's clearly the best wide receiver in college football this year going into the season.
That's a legit point, except if he has a great year, I think the rest of that offense is really good, which means then Will Howard's going to probably have a great year, right?
And that's always the case with this, right? It's why the quarterbacks are always the favorite to get it. But my thought here is, like, when I look at those quarterbacks list, I mean, I'm going back a few years, but it felt like going back, Burrow might have been kind of the last name in this, but we had big time stars every year winning the Heisman. It was like Burrow, Baker Mayfield, who was the
Caleb Williams.
Well, see, I thought he was like less star power. I thought that's where it started dropping off.
Oh, I don't know, man. That was a major transfer when he went from Oklahoma to USC, and then he puts up the numbers he put up. I think he had star power going into that year.
Maybe I didn't find him to be like, I mean, a Johnny Manziel, a Baker Mayfield, a Joe Burrow type of star at least like when he's getting to the draft. I don't think people were as excited about him as a football player the way they were some of those other. Kyler Murray even was like just such a huge name at the time. Jalen Daniels last year, like, put up great numbers, impressive player,
but they lost 3 games, and they didn't lose them because of Jalen Daniels. But I mean, there was a lot of cases to be made for a lot of different guys last year for the Heisman.
That's what I'm saying. To me, it feels like, I don't know, there hasn't been as clear cut on the quarterbacks that they've been given the award to. We've had 3 straight quarterbacks without something else now. Maybe they'll just get quarterback fatigue and look for something else. I'm going to go with Book at a 120-1 odds. I mean, that's pretty crazy. Marvin Harrison was in the conversation last year as a wide receiver, and I mean, he ended up not winning, obviously, but his odds weren't anywhere near 120-1.
What's Ollie Gordon on the list, the running back from Oklahoma State?
God, I have no idea. I'll be searching for days through this list because it's all quarterbacks. I'm sorry, I don't.
Is Brock Vandagriff on that list?
I didn't see him either at the top 35 or so, so I don't know. I'm sure he is. Okay, your Phil Cast. Well, did you give us a Heisman name? Do you want to give us a Heisman name?
No, I said crap. Now I'm forgetting.
The quarterback. Well, no. Who did you say? Dylan Gabriel?
No, I didn't say Gabriel. Go back to your list. He was the 3rd guy in your list. You said he was 3rd odds, and I'm now.
Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, Quinn Ewers. Yeah, because again, I think Texas has a chance to have a great season, and he'd be a big part of that.
That makes sense to me. All right, you're Phil Castellini. How much would you pay the Bengals to get the Chase deal across the finish line to take the heat off of you after another abysmal campaign? What's that word? Would you let them rent Ellie De La Cruz for a kickoff or something?
Would that be something? That would be something. Watching that cat line up at wide receiver.
Just one kickoff would be incredible. Could you imagine like the hype that would surround that?
Until he got split in 2 and couldn't play baseball again, and then you'd be very, very mad. Yeah, I think the problem is that they have a hard time paying. Well, I say that I'm wrong. They paid $106 million for players this past year. I don't think they're paying anybody to not play for them just to get the heat off. I would tell you that.
What does more for them, firing David Bell or the Bengals signing JaMarr Chase? Like,
what does more for who? The Reds?
For the Reds. Which is better for them? Them having to fire David Bell, does that make the fan base happier? Or does just JaMarr Chase getting the deal done and them not bitching about the Reds anymore make it better for the Reds?
That's probably it, because if that's the case, then the fan base is happy for a long time to come. That takes that off the table when the season starts. You can look more forward to the season starting. So yeah, that probably is it.
Okay. Fair enough. We'll wrap it up with this story that we got sent. Someone just said, give me Skinny's thoughts on this. So here's the story.
Okay.
This was in the New York Post. A Thai man was bitten on the testicles by a 12-foot python while he sat on the toilet. So he beat the serpent to death with a toilet brush, leaving his bathroom splattered in blood, according to reports and stunning photos. That's one hell of a lead right there.
Wow.
Thanat Thuang Tuanan felt a sharp pain after he took a seat Tuesday. So he reached down and grabbed the snake by the neck and tried to rip it off his privates, according to Asia Pacific Press. Quote, I felt something biting my balls. It was very painful. So I put my hands in the toilet to see what was wrong. I was shocked that I grabbed a snake, he said. I quickly stood up and plucked it out. I felt pain, really bad pain, and there was blood everywhere. But I was more shocked to have found a python in the toilet. Skinny, your thoughts?
I would have died of a heart attack on the spot. I wouldn't have had a chance to fight the damn thing off. I'd have dropped dead of a heart attack. I really would have.
There is an actual video that the man took of him like choking out the python, holding it by the head. He's got like right above the toilet. And my question is, what now? What do you do? Okay, the thing is bitten you. You're there bleeding out. You've got the thing. You're holding it. You're taking a video on your cell phone. Then what do you do with the python that's in your toilet?
I throw it in the dumpster? I don't know.
I guess you get out and you throw it outside, but it's like by the time you call animal control, this thing's going to create all types of chaos or get loose or whatever.
Did you see the story from like 4 or 5 months ago where some, I don't know if it was in Pat, I don't know where it was, where a python ate a woman, just ate her whole.
I missed that one.
Yeah.
Our listeners not doing their job. They should have sent us that one when we were looking for Ask Skinny
No,
Anything.
this one's more intriguing and more creepy. I mean, the python eating a whole, you just go, oh, that sucks. This one is like, I don't even know how I would react. I think I dropped dead of a heart attack on the spot.
I don't know much about Thailand. Maybe it's like a very normal place. Maybe it's essentially like America, and this guy just got unlucky with where he sat down. But when I read stories like these about other exotic places that I don't know anything about,
I don't want to go.
My friends who travel, it just doesn't make sense. Like, this is where they're like questioning me, like, why do you not want to travel? Why do you not want to go out to the USA? I'm like, one, if they don't have Chipotle there, I don't need to be there, first of all. And second of all, this type of stuff, like what I'm going to places with no air conditioning to then take a chance on getting my balls bitten by a python while I'm just trying to take a dump.
Yeah. I want no part of that. So my probably irrational fear of snakes, but that's a general fear for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
But mine's probably irrational. So like 3 years ago or so, I was doing some yard work up front and, needed another tool from the garage, and it's summertime. So I had both garage doors open. It's around the back of my house and didn't think anything of it. I come around the corner to get the tool, and all of a sudden I get hissed at. And dude, I ran like a scared child. I ran over to I think I ran into my next door neighbor's pool. I just took off running, and it comes slithering out of the garage. My neighbor comes over with one of those little pool things that you sit on in the pool, one of those little, I don't know.
Skimmers.
Yeah. And started trying to shoo it away. He ended up shooing it into his flower bed. And I'm like, well, good luck when you got to cut the grass next. So I'm so irrational that occasionally when I have to go get something in that part of the garage, like, I've got some old memorabilia there or whatever, books are there. I literally won't do it because I still think the snake is there. I know he's not. So I've advanced to this. I take a weapon with me when I go to that part of the garage just in case. And I'm always looking. I'll like bang it a couple times to see if anything moves.
Yeah. And
nothing moves. He's long gone. But my point is he knows where to come back.
Yeah. So I can tell you something terrible that I did just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, actually. I'm getting something out of the garage. Open up my garage. I happen to see a little snake sitting there. It wasn't big, anything scary, or whatever, but it's like sitting right by the front of our garage door. I'm like, oh no, like that's not great. So I should shoot that out. So I'm like, I need to do that, but I was already carrying something of garbage. That's why I was opening the garage door. So I went and I did that. I look back and this thing's like slithered around behind something that's in like a crack.
No.
I'm like, oh crap. Now I got to try to get this out. So I get a broom. I try to get him out. Well, it's underneath like almost the floor. It's like in a crack and I can't get him. And I'm like, my wife yells down and she's like, are you ready? What are you doing down there? I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. So I just left the thing.
Oh no.
Went back down hours later to check if it was still there. Wasn't there. It could be in my bedroom right now.
Correct.
I haven't seen it since. No idea what happened to it.
Oh, man.
But it's just been floating around. I didn't tell thankfully she's not in here right now, but I haven't told my wife still that happened. So if she ends up finding this thing, I might be looking for a new wife.
I may have to DM her and say you might want to listen to the end of the podcast.
Don't do that. In all seriousness, nobody better do that because I might get divorced. That is, in fairness, a divorceable offense. I think I didn't even tell her.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's gone. There's always the part that maybe it got scared and left too.
Skinny, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this, but I'm not a manly man. I don't do man things very well.
Oh,
and this was like case in point.
I can't do anything with I can't do it, man. I don't know. Again, call it irrational, call it what you want. I would tell you this. I can't even go to the reptile house in the zoo. I can't do it.
See, I'm not that freaked out about him. I could have shoot him out. Oh, fine. I would have like used my foot even. I wouldn't have been that scared of it. But like once it was gone, I'm just like, well, I don't know what to do now. And I don't really want to take the time to figure it out. So I'm just going to act like it never happened and hope my wife doesn't find it. I'm just hoping it leaves.
All right. So it never happened.
Keeping the mouse population under control in the garage.
Yeah. And maybe there's the positive.
There we go.
You've got your mouse eater. There you go.
Right.
That works out well. All right.
Thanks
very much. Appreciate the questions. We will be back next week after the Bengals have final cuts to talk about that, start talking about the regular season. And we've got college football games of local interest to talk about next week as well as the 31st really gets underway for all the area college teams. So Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. This has been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition presented by Blake, the Attorney Maislin.